Nebraska Territory, 1871. The whistle of prairie wind through tall grass carried the promise of another brutal winter to the small settlement of Hartwick. A place where nature showed no mercy, where survival trumped sentiment, and where Ruby Morgan had learned the hard lesson that loving someone meant watching them leave, or worse. The autumn air bit through Ruby's shawl as she hung laundry outside the boarding house she'd inherited from her late aunt. At 22, she'd seen enough death and disappointment to last several lifetimes. First her parents to cholera when she was 16, then her fiancé to a cattle rustler's bullet 3 years past. Now she ran the only respectable lodging in town with a simple philosophy: rely on no one but yourself. Her chestnut hair, normally plaited tightly against her neck, had partially come loose in the wind. She tucked a strand behind her ear with fingers reddened from the cold water and harsh lye soap. The plain blue calico dress she wore had seen better days, but practicality outweighed vanity in her world. What use was looking pretty in a place that stripped away everything beautiful? Ruby reached for another sheet, squinting as the setting sun caught her eyes. That's when she heard the approaching hoofbeats. "Miss Morgan," called Sheriff Wilson from atop his dun gelding, "got a new boarder headed your way. Cowhand from the Silverhorn Ranch, owner vouches for him." Ruby nodded curtly. As long as he pays, keeps quiet, and follows house rules. The sheriff chuckled. "Not the warmest welcome, but I reckon that's all a cowboy expects these days." "Warmth costs extra," Ruby replied, her expression unchanged as she pinned the last pillowcase to the line. After the sheriff departed, Ruby gathered her basket and headed inside. The boarding house had 5 rooms to let, plus her own quarters at the back. Currently only 2 were occupied, one by the elderly schoolteacher and another by a traveling salesman who'd be moving on tomorrow. The empty rooms weighed on her finances, but not enough to make her welcoming. Better empty rooms than trouble. She believed with absolute conviction that the frontier was no place for sentiment. Love was a weakness the territory exploited. People who opened their hearts inevitably found them broken. Better to keep to herself, run her business, and never depend on anyone else's promises. The knock came just after she'd lit the lamps. Ruby smoothed her apron and opened the front door to find a tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Evening, ma'am," came a deep voice as he removed his hat. "Name's Noah Keller. Sheriff Wilson said you might have a room available." As he stepped into the light of the entryway, Ruby felt an unwelcome flutter in her chest. At perhaps 25, he stood before her with clear green eyes set in a face that appeared too kind for the harshness of ranch work. His dark blonde hair was cleaner than most cowhands, curling slightly where it met his collar. Though trail-worn, his clothes were neat, his face freshly shaven save for a light stubble along his jawline. $3 a week," Ruby said flatly, refusing to acknowledge her reaction. "Includes breakfast and supper. No drinking, no women, no rowdiness. Payment in advance." Noah smiled, revealing a small dimple in his left cheek. "Yes, ma'am, sounds fair." "I'm not your ma'am," Ruby corrected him. "Miss Morgan will do." "Miss Morgan, then," he amended, the smile never leaving his face as he reached into his pocket and produced the money. "I'm just grateful for a real roof. Been sleeping under the stars since I left Kansas." Ruby took the coins without comment, turning to retrieve a key from the hook board. "Room 3, top of the stairs, supper's at 6 sharp, miss it and you go hungry till morning." She expected him to react to her coldness. Most men did, with offense or mockery, but he simply nodded, genuine gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you kindly, Miss Morgan. I surely won't miss supper." As he climbed the stairs with his saddlebags, Ruby caught herself watching him longer than necessary. She quickly turned away, mentally scolding herself. No matter how polite or handsome, men like him were just passing through. The territory would claim him too, one way or another. Noah Keller proved annoyingly difficult to dislike over the following days. He rose before dawn, took his breakfast without complaint, and returned from the ranch each evening covered in honest dirt but never tracking it through her clean floors. Unlike most cowhands, he seemed to possess manners and consideration. What irritated Ruby most was how he treated everyone with the same easy kindness, from old Mrs. Holloway, the schoolteacher, to the grubby children who played in the street. He'd tip his hat, offer a helping hand, share a joke that somehow never seemed at anyone's expense. "You're new to these parts," Ruby finally commented one evening as she cleared the supper dishes. The other boarders had retired, leaving them alone in the dining room. "Is it that obvious?" Noah asked, pushing back from the table to help her gather plates. I can manage, she said stiffly, but he continued anyway. My father always said idle hands were the devil's playthings, he explained, stacking the dishes carefully. Besides, seems unfair for you to do everything yourself. Ruby bristled. I've managed just fine before you arrived. I don't doubt it, his eyes met hers without challenge. You strike me as someone who manages no matter what comes. Something in his tone, not pity but perhaps understanding, made her uncomfortable. She took the stack of dishes from his hands. The territory burns kindness out of people, she warned. You'd do well to toughen up. Noah leaned against the doorframe, studying her with those unnervingly direct eyes. With respect, Miss Morgan, I've seen my share of hardship. Lost my mother to fever when I was 12. Watched my father work himself into an early grave after that, buried my brother after Shiloh. His voice remained even, not seeking sympathy, but I made a choice not to let it make me hard. Then you're a fool, Ruby replied, though her words lacked conviction. Maybe so, he smiled slightly, but I sleep well at night. The following Sunday brought unexpected rain, forcing Ruby to abandon her plans to mend the back fence. Instead, she found herself baking extra bread, the familiar rhythm of kneading dough soothing her restless energy. The front door opened, bringing a gust of damp air and Noah Keller dripping onto her clean floor. Before she could protest, he produced a brown paper package. Apologies for the water, Miss Morgan, I'll clean it straight away. He set the package on a dry portion of the sideboard. Picked this up from the general store when I heard they'd received a shipment. The storekeeper mentioned you'd been asking. Ruby wiped flour from her hands, eyeing the package with surprise. Inside was the particular brand of sewing needles she'd been seeking for weeks. How did you know? She asked, genuinely perplexed. Noah shrugged, already mopping the puddle with a rag he'd taken from near the door. Heard you talking to Mrs. Holloway about breaking your last good needle. Figured everyone needs to mend things now and again. The thoughtfulness of the gesture left Ruby momentarily speechless. It wasn't grand or showy, just a simple kindness that revealed his attention to details most would miss. What do I owe you? She asked, recovering her composure. Nothing at all. Consider it thanks for the best meals I've had since leaving home. She wanted to refuse, accepting gifts created obligations, but something stopped her. Thank you, Mr. Keller. Noah, he corrected gently. Mr. Keller was my father. Noah then, Ruby conceded, surprising herself. There's fresh bread if you're hungry. His smile warmed the kitchen more effectively than the oven. Now that's an offer no sensible man would refuse. As autumn deepened toward winter, Ruby found herself increasingly aware of Noah's presence. She noticed the careful way he mended his own clothes in the evenings, the books he read by lamplight, how he'd carved a tiny wooden horse for little Tommy Wilson, the sheriff's son. Against her better judgment, she began to look forward to their conversations. Noah spoke of places she'd never seen, the rolling hills of Kentucky where he'd grown up, the bustling streets of St. Louis where he'd worked for a cattle buyer before deciding to head west. He listened with genuine interest when she reluctantly shared stories of her own past, her childhood in Ohio, the difficult journey west with parents who sought a fresh start, her determination to keep her aunt's boarding house alive after inheriting it. She found herself revealing more than she intended one evening as they sat on the front porch, the first snow of the season dusting the ground. My aunt taught me that sentiment is a luxury, Ruby said, watching her breath cloud in the cold air. She buried 3 husbands and 4 children, said the territory takes whatever you love, so best not to love at all. Noah was quiet a moment before responding. And what do you think? I think she was right, Ruby pulled her shawl tighter. My parents died 2 months after we arrived. My fiancé, she stopped abruptly, unwilling to speak his name aloud. I'm sorry, Noah said simply. It doesn't matter now, Ruby stood, signaling the end of the conversation. It was a long time ago. But later that night, alone in her room, Ruby pulled out the portrait she kept hidden under her bed, the only likeness she had of William, painted just weeks before a cattle rustler's bullet took him. She traced his features with her finger, wondering why she suddenly felt the need to look at it after so many months of keeping it hidden away. The following week brought a blizzard that howled through town like a living thing, trapping everyone indoors. Ruby worried about Noah, who'd ridden to the ranch that morning despite her warnings about the threatening sky. When hoofbeats sounded outside well after dark, she rushed to the door before catching herself, slowing her steps to appear merely curious rather than concerned. Noah stumbled in, half frozen and exhausted. He'd spent hours helping the ranch hands move cattle to sheltered areas before the worst hit, then fought his way back through deepening snow. "You're a fool," Ruby scolded as she helped him remove his ice-crusted coat. "You could have stayed at the ranch." "And miss your cooking," he joked weakly, his lips blue with cold. Ruby built up the fire and practically pushed him into the chair beside it. Without thinking, she took his hands between hers, rubbing them to restore circulation. "Your fingers could have frozen," she muttered, avoiding his gaze. "Worth it," Noah said softly, "to see you worried about me." Ruby dropped his hands as if burned. "I would worry about anyone foolish enough to ride in this weather." But they both knew it wasn't true. Something had shifted between them, something that frightened her more than the howling storm outside. The blizzard lasted 3 days, effectively trapping everyone indoors. With only 3 boarders to care for, Ruby found herself with Noah more often than not. They played checkers, read aloud from his dog-eared copy of the Three Musketeers, and spoke of things beyond daily concerns. On the 3rd evening, Noah mentioned his plans once spring arrived. "Mr. Silverhorn has offered me a permanent position," he said. "Even talked about a parcel of land I might purchase from him in a few years, once I've saved enough." Ruby felt an unexpected pang. "So you're staying in Hartwick?" "I've been moving since I was 18, Noah replied, his eyes on the checkerboard between them. "Might be time to put down roots." "The territory isn't kind to roots," Ruby warned, but her voice lacked conviction. Noah looked up, his gaze steady. "Some things are worth the risk." The intensity in his eyes made her move away, using the excuse of adding wood to the fire. The territory took everything you loved, wasn't that what experience had taught her? And yet, for the first time in years, she found herself wondering if that was the entire truth. When the storm finally broke, leaving pristine white drifts higher than fence posts, the town slowly emerged to assess damage. Ruby and Noah worked together to clear paths from the boarding house to the street. Despite the bitter cold, Ruby felt warmer than she had in years, laughing as Noah dramatically collapsed into a snowbank, claiming exhaustion. "You're ridiculous," she called, but couldn't stop her smile. "And you're beautiful when you laugh," he replied, so naturally it took her breath away. That night, Ruby again took out William's portrait, studying the young man she'd once promised to marry. For the first time, she realized the memory had softened, the sharp edges of grief worn smooth by time. William would always be her first love, but perhaps he needn't be her last. The thought terrified her. The next morning, when Noah came down for breakfast, Ruby was coldly formal, keeping conversation to necessary exchanges about the weather and meal times. Confusion and hurt flashed across his face, but he didn't press her for explanations. For weeks, Ruby maintained her distance, speaking to Noah only when necessary, making sure they were never alone. She threw herself into work, scrubbing floors that were already clean, reorganizing linen closets that needed no attention, anything to avoid confronting the feelings she'd allowed to develop. If Noah was wounded by her sudden coldness, he didn't show it beyond a certain quietness that replaced his usual cheerful manner. He continued to help around the boarding house when she would allow it, chopping extra firewood and repairing loose floorboards without being asked. On a particularly bitter February night, Ruby was awakened by sounds from downstairs. Wrapping her robe tightly around her, she descended to find Noah stoking the main fireplace. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharper than intended. He looked up, shadows playing across his face. "Fire was dying. With the temperature dropping, I was worried about the pipes freezing." He straightened. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," she lied. The way the firelight caught his features made her heart tighten painfully. "Ruby," he said quietly, the first time he'd used her given name, "have I done something to offend you?" "No," she admitted after a long moment. "You've been kind." "Then why do you look at me like I'm a threat?" His directness left no room for evasion. Ruby stared into the flames, weighing truth against safety. "Because kindness is temporary," she finally said. "People leave or die, that's the reality of the frontier." Noah took a step toward her, stopping when she tensed. "Not everyone leaves." "They do," her voice caught. "My parents, my aunt, William." "William?" he asked gently. "My fiancé," the word felt strange after so long. 3 years ago, cattle rustlers. He was trying to help a neighbor recover stolen stock. She didn't add that she'd begged him not to go, that his last words to her had been a promise to return by sundown. Noah was silent for so long that Ruby finally looked up, finding his eyes filled with understanding that hurt worse than pity. "I can't imagine how much that hurt," he said finally. and I understand why you protect yourself. Do you? Ruby challenged, suddenly angry at his composure. I've watched everyone I've ever loved leave me in one way or another. This territory takes and takes until there's nothing left. Not nothing, Noah countered quietly. You're still here, still standing, still capable of feeling, even if you try to deny it. His words struck too close to her carefully constructed defenses. You know nothing about me. I know you leave fresh coffee for Mrs. Holloway every morning because her arthritis makes it hard to work the stove. I know you secretly reduced Mr. Peterson's rent when the bank foreclosed on his farm. I know you mended my shirt last month when you thought I wouldn't notice. His voice remained gentle but firm. You try so hard to be cold, Ruby Morgan, but your actions betray you at every turn. Tears threatened and Ruby turned away, unwilling to let him see how deeply his words affected her. It's late, we should both return to our rooms. She fled upstairs before he could respond, her composure crumbling with each step. Inside her room, she pulled William's portrait from beneath the bed, seeking the comfort of familiar grief over this new, terrifying vulnerability. The next day, Ruby avoided Noah entirely, sending the housekeeper to deliver messages when necessary. She told herself it was for the best, that whatever had grown between them could only end in more pain. But fate intervened in the form of a letter that arrived from the Silverhorn Ranch. Mr. Silverhorn's wife had taken ill, and he requested Noah's immediate assistance with urgent ranch matters while he tended to her. Noah would need to stay at the ranch for at least a week. Noah left a brief note for Ruby explaining his absence. She told herself the hollow feeling in her chest was relief, not disappointment. The boarding house felt emptier without his presence. Ruby caught herself glancing toward his usual seat at dinner, listening for his footsteps on the porch. Even Mrs. Holloway noticed his absence. That Keller boy is a fine young man, the elderly teacher commented over breakfast. Reminds me of my late husband, solid and dependable, with a kind heart. He's just passing through, Ruby responded automatically. Mrs. Holloway gave her a knowing look. Is he? Seems to me he's putting down roots. Heard he's been looking at that vacant lot next to the smithy. Ruby nearly dropped the coffee pots. What? Oh yes, Sheriff mentioned it yesterday. Said young Keller has been saving to build a carpentry shop. Apparently he was apprenticed to a cabinet maker before the war. The older woman sipped her coffee with apparent innocence. He's quite talented from what I hear. The information unsettled Ruby deeply. She'd assumed Noah would eventually move on like all cowboys did, following work from ranch to ranch. The idea that he intended to establish himself permanently in Hartwick both thrilled and terrified her. 5 days into Noah's absence, Ruby was changing linens in his room when she noticed a small wooden box beneath his bed. She told herself she was merely tidying as she picked it up, but curiosity overwhelmed propriety. Inside, she found exquisitely carved wooden figures, a deer no bigger than her thumb, a perfect miniature rose, a tiny bird with delicate feathers. At the bottom lay a half-finished carving of a woman's profile that made her breath catch. Though incomplete, the likeness to herself was unmistakable. Ruby carefully returned everything to the box and placed it exactly where she'd found it, her mind reeling. The skill evident in those carvings spoke of years of training, not casual whittling. And the unfinished portrait of herself revealed feelings Noah had never directly expressed. That night, Ruby again took out William's portrait, but for the first time she truly saw it for what it was, a memory of someone who would always hold a place in her heart, but who belonged to the past. She realized she'd been using grief as a shield against the risk of loving again. When hoofbeats sounded in the yard 3 days later, Ruby was elbow-deep in bread dough. She forced herself to continue kneading, determined not to appear eager for Noah's return. But when minutes passed without his familiar step on the porch, she moved to the window. The sight that greeted her stopped her heart. Noah was slumped over his horse, one arm hanging limply, his shirt darkened with what could only be blood. Sheriff Wilson and another man were helping him down. Ruby ran outside without pausing for a shawl, the February cold forgotten. What happened? She demanded, reaching them as Noah's knees buckled. Rustlers, the sheriff explained grimly as they supported Noah between them. They hit the Silverhorns' north pasture. Noah and 2 other hands interrupted them. There was shooting. The others, Ruby asked, leading them toward the door. One dead, others at the doctor's with a bullet in his shoulder. The sheriff glanced at Noah. This one took a graze to the side and a bad fall from his horse when it spooked. Doctor's overwhelmed with the other hand. Said Noah needs rest and watching, nothing more. They got Noah to his room, where Ruby took charge, sending the men for hot water and clean bandages. Once alone with him, she carefully removed his bloodied shirt to reveal an angry furrow along his ribs where the bullet had grazed him. His right shoulder was badly bruised from the fall. "You're supposed to be careful," she murmured as she cleaned the wound, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Noah, drifting in and out of consciousness, managed a weak smile. "Had to come back." "Promised." "Hush now," Ruby soothed, fighting back tears. "Just rest." For 3 days, Ruby barely left Noah's side, tending his fever when infection set in, changing bandages, forcing broth between his cracked lips. She slept in the chair beside his bed, waking at his slightest movement. On the 4th morning, she awoke to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time since his return. "You stayed," he said hoarsely. Ruby busied herself pouring water from the pitcher. "Someone had to make sure you didn't die." "I'd have lost a week's rent." Noah's laugh turned into a wince as it pulled at his injured side. "Always practical, Miss Morgan." "Ruby," she corrected quietly, helping him sit up to drink. "I think circumstances warrant first names, don't you?" His smile was worth every sleepless hour. "I'm honored." As Noah recovered, something fundamental shifted between them. Ruby no longer maintained her cold distance, though she remained reserved by nature. She found herself sharing more of her thoughts, listening more openly to his, and allowing small touches, a hand on an arm, fingers brushing while passing a plate. One evening, as Noah sat on the porch enjoying the first mild day of early spring, Ruby joined him with 2 cups of coffee. "Doc says I can return to light work next week," Noah said, accepting the cup with thanks. Ruby nodded, watching a pair of bluebirds flit between budding tree branches. "The Silverhorn will be glad to have you back." "Actually, I've been meaning to tell you." Noah set his cup down, turning to face her fully. "I'm giving notice at the ranch. Mr. Silverhorn understands." Ruby's heart stuttered. "You're leaving Hartwick." She couldn't keep the dismay from her voice. "No," Noah's expression softened. "I've purchased that lot next to the smithy. Going to set up as a cabinet maker and carpenter." Relief washed through her. Mrs. Holloway mentioned something about that. I wasn't sure whether to believe her. "It's been my plan for some time," Noah admitted. "I learned the trade from my father, apprenticed formally in Kentucky before the war. Ranch work was just to earn enough to get established." "Why didn't you say anything?" Noah shrugged, wincing slightly at the movement. "Wasn't sure if I'd be welcome to stay. In town, I mean." The true meaning behind his words hung in the air between them. Ruby found herself at a crossroads, retreat to the safety of isolation or risk her heart once more. "I found your carvings," she confessed suddenly. "When I was changing your linens, I wasn't snooping truly, but—" "It's all right," Noah assured her. "I'm not ashamed of them." "They're beautiful," Ruby said softly, especially the unfinished one." Color rose in Noah's cheeks. "Ah, that one, I should have asked permission." "For what, to see me?" Ruby surprised herself with her boldness. "To capture you," Noah corrected. "There's a difference between looking and truly seeing." The distinction resonated through Ruby's entire being. Noah had seen her, not just her appearance, but the woman beneath her carefully constructed walls. Before she could respond, Sheriff Wilson's son Tommy came running up the walk, a telegram clutched in his small hand. "Miss Morgan, Pa said to bring this right away." Ruby thanked the boy with a penny and unfolded the paper with a sense of foreboding. As she read, the blood drained from her face. "Ruby, what is it?" Noah asked, alarmed. "Cattle rustlers," she said numbly. "The same ones who hit the Silverhorn. They've been captured." She looked up, eyes wide. "One of them confessed to killing William and the others 3 years ago." Noah reached for her hand, his grip strong and steady. "When's the trial?" 2 days from now in Junction City." Ruby stared at the paper. "Sheriff Wilson says I should attend. As William's fiancé, I have the right to see justice done." "Do you want to go?" Noah asked gently. Ruby considered the question carefully. 3 years ago, she would have wanted nothing more than to see her fiancé's killers hang. Now she wasn't certain what closure looked like. "I think I need to," she said finally. "Not for vengeance, for peace." Noah nodded. "I'll accompany you. Your injuries are healing well enough for a train journey." His tone brooked no argument. "You shouldn't face this alone." The next morning found them on the eastbound train to Junction City, the landscape rushing past as Ruby wrestled with memories she'd long suppressed. Noah sat beside her, a solid presence offering strength without demands. I've kept his portrait under my bed, Ruby admitted as fields gave way to scattered homesteads, for 3 years. Couldn't bear to look at it, couldn't bear to put it away. Noah's hand covered hers. He was important to you, still is. Yes, Ruby agreed, but not in the same way. I've been hiding behind his memory. Using grief as an excuse not to risk my heart again. And now, Noah asked, his voice carefully neutral. Ruby looked out the window, gathering courage. Now I think perhaps the greatest dishonor to his memory would be to stop living because he couldn't. The trial was brief but emotional. The three captured rustlers, hardened men with cold eyes, showed no remorse as witnesses recounted their crimes. When Ruby was called to speak about William's character, she found strength in Noah's encouraging nod from the gallery. William Bennett was kind and brave, she testified, her voice clear. He died trying to help a neighbor in need. That was his nature, to extend a hand without hesitation. She paused, realizing the truth of her next words as she spoke them. He would want justice, not vengeance, and he would want those he loved to find happiness again. The judge sentenced the men to hang at dawn. Outside the courthouse, Ruby felt a strange lightness, as if a burden had been set down after a long journey. Are you all right? Noah asked as they walked toward their modest hotel. Yes, Ruby said and meant it. For the first time in years, I think I truly am. That night in the privacy of her hotel room, Ruby took out William's portrait one last time. She studied the young man she'd once planned to marry, seeing him clearly now, not as a ghost that haunted her, but as a cherished part of a past that had shaped but needn't define her. Goodbye, William, she whispered, pressing her lips to the painted surface before carefully wrapping it in cloth. She would always keep it, but no longer hidden under her bed like a secret shame. The journey back to Hartwick the following day felt like traveling toward the future rather than returning to the past. Ruby and Noah spoke of practical matters, his plans for the carpentry shop, improvements needed at the boarding house, but beneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of possibility neither was quite ready to name. Spring arrived in earnest by the time they returned, the prairie awakening with wildflowers and new grass. Noah moved his few belongings from the boarding house to a small room behind the smithy while he began construction on his shop. Ruby told herself she didn't miss his presence, but the boarding house felt emptier without his quiet strength and gentle humor. She found excuses to walk past the construction site, watching as the framework of his shop took shape through his skilled hands. One evening in late April, Noah appeared at the boarding house door, looking uncharacteristically nervous. I was hoping you might join me for a walk, he said, hat in hand. There's something I'd like to show you. Curious, Ruby agreed, fetching her shawl against the cool evening air. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached his partially built shop. The outer walls were complete, the roof half-shingled. It's coming along beautifully, Ruby commented. Thank you, but that's not what I wanted to show you. Noah led her inside, where the last rays of sunlight streamed through unglazed windows. In the center of the main room stood a sheet-covered object. Noah took a deep breath before speaking. After William died, you closed yourself off. Used the boarding house as a fortress against feeling. I understand why. He stepped toward the covered object. But you're more than the keeper of other people's temporary homes, Ruby. You deserve a home of your own. With that, he pulled away the sheet to reveal an exquisitely crafted rocking chair. The dark walnut gleamed in the fading light, the spindles and arms curved in graceful lines that invited touch. It's beautiful, Ruby breathed, running her fingers along the smooth wood. It's yours, Noah said, whether or not, he faltered for the first time since she'd known him, whether or not you accept what comes with it. Ruby looked up sharply. And what comes with it? Noah met her gaze steadily. My heart, my hands, my future if you want them. The directness of his offer, so like the man himself, left no room for misinterpretation. Ruby felt tears gather as the last of her carefully constructed walls crumbled. I found William's killers, she said softly. I've made my peace with the past, but I'm still afraid, Noah. The territory is harsh, people still leave. Die. They do, Noah agreed, stepping closer. Nothing's certain out here except that tomorrow will bring challenges we can't foresee, but I'd rather face them with you than alone. And I think perhaps you might feel the same. Ruby looked at the rocking chair, a symbol of permanence, of home, of shared evenings and quiet moments, and made her choice. The day after I buried William, she said, her voice gaining strength, my aunt told me never to love again, said it wasn't worth the pain. She took Noah's hand, feeling its strength and gentleness. I think she was wrong. Noah's smile dawned slowly, lighting his entire face. Ruby Morgan, are you saying yes? I'm saying I want to try, she amended, not hiding behind grief or fear, just living with you. It was enough. Noah gathered her gently in his arms, mindful of his still healing injury, and sealed their understanding with a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. The following Sunday, Ruby Morgan caused quite a stir in Hartwick by walking to church with Noah Keller, her hand resting comfortably in the crook of his arm. Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly, while Sheriff Wilson exchanged knowing smiles with his wife. That evening, Ruby carefully placed William's portrait on the mantelpiece in her private sitting room, no longer hidden, but honored as part of what had made her the woman she'd become. Beside it, she set one of Noah's exquisite carvings, a pair of bluebirds perched on a branch, their heads tilted toward one another in eternal conversation. By the time autumn painted the prairie gold, Noah's shop was flourishing, his reputation for fine craftsmanship spreading throughout the county. He'd built a small house behind the shop, but spent most evenings at the boarding house, helping Ruby with accounts or simply enjoying her company. On the anniversary of their meeting, he presented her with the finished carving of her profile, now mounted in a frame of polished cherry wood. The likeness captured not just her features but something of her spirit, strength, and vulnerability in perfect balance. It's how I've always seen you, Noah explained as Ruby traced the delicate lines with wondering fingers. Even when you tried your hardest to push me away. Ruby thought of the frightened woman she'd been a year ago, so certain that love could only lead to loss. That woman could never have imagined the joy of building a life with someone who saw her completely and loved her anyway. I'm glad you were stubborn, she said, leaning into his embrace. Noah laughed, the sound reverberating through his chest against her ear. Persistence is a virtue when the prize is worthwhile. They married that December, in a simple ceremony attended by the entire town. Ruby wore a dress of deep blue velvet, impractical but beautiful, a concession to the joy she no longer tried to deny. Noah's eyes, when she joined him before the minister, held such tenderness that she finally understood what her aunt had never learned, that love, even on the harsh frontier, wasn't weakness but the greatest strength of all. The boarding house remained under Ruby's management, though they lived in the house Noah had built. Together, they created a home that welcomed travelers and townsfolk alike, a place of warmth in a territory that could still be brutal and unforgiving. Years later, when their children asked about the portrait that hung beside Noah's wooden birds, Ruby would tell them about William and the lesson she'd learned. That the heart expands to hold both grief and joy, past and future, memory and hope. That love, rather than making you vulnerable to the frontier's harshness, gave you the courage to face it. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when Noah's arm rested around her shoulders as they sat in the rocking chair he'd made with such care, Ruby would remember the frightened young woman who'd hidden her heart beneath the bed, and silently thank the persistent cowboy who'd found not just a portrait, but the courage she'd thought forever lost.